Today is November 27th, 2024. We're here with Dr. Laura Tanna, a distinguished linguist, author, and overall great communicator. On behalf of the African Caribbean Institute of Jamaica, Jamaica Memory Bank, I am Marsha Hall. Dr. Tanna, good morning.
Good morning. This is a real pleasure to have you all up here at my home.
And it's a beautiful home, may I add. So we're aware of your multicultural background. Tell us about your first introduction to African and Caribbean cultures.
Well, actually, I was raised in West Lafayette, Indiana, which is where Purdue University is. And at the time, it was segregated. Anyone who was black had to live across the Wabash in Lafayette, Indiana, or if the Catholics had their own schools. Everybody knew who the Jewish people were. We had one family of Chinese who came. The father was a professor at the university, and they escaped communist China. And Hung was in class with me. We're still dear friends, and we were Methodists. And so, at the age of 8. My parents, when they went to the church, there was this African student at the church. And so they invited him home for Sunday meal. And F. Young became part of our family. He was like a cousin. And so from the age of 8, having a Nigerian with us was very much my introduction to Africa. And in fact, we remained friends, and his daughter and so on. And when his family did their research on their father, this is his father, and they gave us the book about their family history in Nigeria. So that's how close, and that's how I started with that. And because my father was a Rhodes Scholar.
Oh, wow.
I was born in Montana, and my mother born in Montana, and Daddy from South Dakota. He went to the University of Montana after the war, and he was a Rhodes Scholar, so we went to Oxford, and because he was familiar with the university system in England, they asked him, the Rockefeller Foundation asked him if he would go to Makerere University. It's the oldest university in East Africa, and it's in Kampala, Uganda.
Yes.
So at the age of 14, I left West Lafayette, and we went to Uganda. And it was also the years of Uhuru, independence. Yes. And, all the white kids were shipped off to Kenya or to the UK.
Yes.
And we thought that was crazy. I mean, why would you miss staying in a country that was getting its independence?
Right on the spur.
So they managed to find a place for me at the Shia Imam Ismaili Secondary School in Kampala. And it was, there were 5 European kids. There were about 50 African kids, and there were 200 Ismailis, followers of the Aga Khan. And I was the first American who went there. And so that was, I made friends with 2 of the Ismaili girls, but my closest friend was Sarah Mulira. She was in Uganda. Her father was in the Lukiko, which is the parliament of Uganda. Her mother was the aunt of the Kabaka, the king of Uganda. And so it was just a marvelous, and again, we became such close friends that we would see, she came over and studied in New York. We would see each other in London when she was working there, and when I went back to Uganda and so on. And Sarah and I just remained friends for all our life, and I think it was just 2 years ago that she died in Uganda. So through that introduction, Uganda became very, very important to me. While we were in Uganda with my parents and I, we traveled 48,000 miles. We drove because mostly it was Daddy was visiting the universities. And in fact, he later joined the foundation and became head of the University Development Committee for the Rockefeller Foundation. And he helped develop staff for Africa, Asia, and South American universities. But we would leave and we would go to Nairobi, Kenya. We would go to Dar es Salaam, Tanganyika, and Dar was my favorite city. I loved Dar. We went over to Zanzibar, And then those two countries joined in 1964
Yes.
to become Tanzania. We drove down through northern and southern Rhodesia, as it was then called.
Rhodesia, yes.
Right? And we went into South Africa, which this was in, they didn't even, when we crossed the border into South Africa, the men there, they did not even know that there was a country called Uganda. I mean, it was that strange. The Dutch part in Cape Town and area, I didn't, Johannesburg, I didn't care for so much. Up in Durban, where it's more Anglo-Indian and so forth, that part was okay. But I think they arrested like 36,000 members. They called it the Pokwa uprising. I can't do the tape, but 36,000 were arrested while we were visiting there. So it was a time of turmoil. We went back to Uganda, and then when we left, Daddy joined the foundation in New York City, and Chelsea would know about that. And we flew, and we stopped in Kinshasa, Congo. We stopped in Accra, Ghana.
Yes.
And in Lagos, and drove over to Ibadan, the university in Ibadan, Nigeria.
Yes.
Then we went to Monrovia, Liberia. That was very strange for me because we stopped in this, they put us up in some ultra-modern hotel, and it was the first time I'd ever seen a telephone in a bathroom.
Wow.
It was, the juxtaposition was very weird. Then we went to, I think, Abidjan in the Côte d'Ivoire, and Dakar in Senegal.
Yes.
And then we went to Cairo, Egypt. And my father, one of his closest friends at Oxford, was an Egyptian rose scholar. So we stayed with the Egyptian family in Cairo. This was in, I think it was May of '63. It was so hot. But because Nasser was in power then, they did not allow, foreigners could not stay with families without reporting to the police. So we went and reported to the police. They said, fine. And I'll never forget, with the girls, I took the trolley out to where the pyramids were, and my parents drove in the car with it. And when we got to the pyramids, it was like a slope down. It was in the evening, or late afternoon, and Mrs. Mustafa had got a guide for us. We were all alone there. If you go now, I mean, it's just so congested.
Yes, it's a tourist trap.
Yes, true. But when we got down, there was a candle he used, and we got down into the bottom of the pyramid. I was surprised there weren't steps. It was a ramp. He blew the candle out.
Wow.
And we were all in darkness, and she said, he wants bakshish, tip of rice. But anyway, I remember the women being very liberated at that time.
Right.
When she would drive, and she would shake her fist out the window at the taxi drivers if they got in her way. It was a lovely experience. Egyptians, I had a marvelous introduction to Egypt. We also stopped in Tunis, Tunisia. And so what I'm saying is that I had this incredible immersion into all these different kinds of African countries and peoples when I was just a teenager.
And that has surely shaped you today as a person you are, coming to Jamaica, which we'll get to, of course, during the interview, because I have a few questions leading up to that. So is it safe to say that there were specific aspects of these cultures that appealed to you or held your attention the most?
Well, I have to tell you, I cheated and asked you if you would kind of indicate to me what sort of questions I would answer. And as a result of your very kindly giving, very thorough, really, I did give some thought to that. And you know what it was? It was literature. You call me a linguist. Department of African Languages and Literature. I was on the literature side. I had to take two classes in linguistics, and I was terrible. But anyway, so while I was in New York, I was head of my editor of the literary magazine. I had a very fine English professor who taught me. It was very small. Friend Seminary. I went to a Quaker school, but most of the kids were either Jewish or Episcopalian. But I have a great respect for the Quaker things. In fact, some of my ancestors are Quakers.
Their ethos is very good.
Excellent, excellent. And so my parents coming from the West, I was the only kid in my class who applied to a university west of the Mississippi. Wow. Everybody else was like Ivy League, Seven Sisters, and so on. So the literary magazine was important to me. And so then in California, I went to the University of California, Berkeley. And I met two African students who had a very important impact on me. One of them was a Nigerian who was a student at Stanford University. And he started a magazine called the Journal of the New African Literature, Jonala. And I dug out these old copies. He was at Stanford and I was at University of California, Berkeley, and I was the assistant editor. And so we worked on this magazine, which was to give, remember this is like 65 to 66, yes. It started in 66. It gave African students or Africans in the U.S.
visibility.
Thank you, exactly. Somewhere where they could get their work published. It was a biannual international publication. And so I continued working with that. And I think that, if you wouldn't mind,
no.
I haven't done this. I came across it when I dug out these magazines. I actually wrote a poem about what the impact of living in Kampala had on me.
Oh, wow.
And when I read it again, I thought, oh my gosh, I must have known, even then, back then, when must have been written in 66. And I feel very embarrassed because I'm not a poet, but if you don't mind.
No, we don't mind. We were recording for the Annals of History.
Okay, well, this is called Haunting Memories of Kampala. And I wrote, willingly you obsess me, haunting my nights, lingering into my days. For have I never held you? Have I never seen your images that lurk in every recess of my mind and soul? Have I never seen with wondering eyes the rising mist purify your blood-red soil, hovering over your templed green hills, holding in its mist a mosque of brilliant white, created in dawn, now flags atop a sacred temple, sheltering graven images and feverish sages, then swirling on to enter the deafening silence of another temple to the same God. Mist and breeze caressing, comforting, as sun and storm gently clash. Warm fragrance of coffee blossoms, mingling with jasmine and moonflower, drifting on the mild breeze. Fragile white blossoms, fleeting as the memory on which your love is held in pain. And as I lose you, I cry, for have I never held you? Have I never seen with wondering eyes? Sunrise, vivid waves of color giving way to sun and storm as clouds drift and disappear with the stars until black bats swarm out of your forest flying into the purple dust. Yet one dawn, a mist and dust, these memories are no roots. And what I was referring to here, Kampala is built on hills.
Right.
And on each of these hills there is like a temple. I refer here to the Muslim mosque.
Yeah.
There was Hindu temple with the flags flying. There was the Baha'i temple. Are you familiar with the Baha'i?
Yes.
It's built in a way that it's so totally silent inside. There's one up in Illinois that I visited as well. And then, of course, Lake Victoria. From the hills you could see Lake Victoria off in the distance.
Yes.
So it was just, it really, you can tell. But I must have had some kind of knowledge that it was never going to be a permanent home. So when I came, remember when I said to you that I had met two African students?
Yes.
Okay. The other one was a Ugandan-born citizen of Uganda, but of Indian ancestry.
Mm-hmm.
And we met at a rally to protest UDI. Do you know what that is? That's Unilateral Declaration of Independence. When the Kenyans wanted independence, the British sent in the troops. They called them the Mau Mau, and
yes.
It was a terrible war.
Very.
When the white settlers in Rhodesia wanted independence, the British more or less sort of said, take the country, great, fine, no problem. And so at Berkeley, we went out and we went over to the San Francisco, the British consulate, and we picketed the British consulate to protest UDI. So that's how I met my husband, the man who became my husband. And we were friends. So after I went off to France. I've skipped too far, I think, because I have to. I'm a writer, not a speaker, so I have to make notes, and so I will make notes here. I think it was the fact that I had worked on Janala, the fact that I lived in Africa,
Right.
and I had, working with Janala, I had met African writers, I've been to conferences and all this kind of thing. I also went over to France my junior year, and I went to the University of Stendhal in Grenoble, and I went to the Sorbonne in Paris. And that was in 68. The May of 68 is when they had this revolution throughout France.
Yes.
Les événements de 68.
Algeria wanted their independence.
And the students,
yes.
and so it was an incredible time. So when I came back that summer of 68, that's when Tanna and I started living together. And I think it was because of all my work with Africa and so on that I was offered two fellowships. One, to go to UCLA to work on African Arts magazine, Arts Afrique, with, John Povey, I'd met him, and so I was offered this to do my master's at UCLA, or to go to the University of Wisconsin at Madison. And there they were offering me a 3-year fellowship to do my doctorate in African languages and literature. And at that time, there were only 3 places in the world where you could go directly into getting a doctorate in African literature. It was the School of Oriental and African Studies, SOAS in London. It was in Ibadan in Nigeria, and Wisconsin. And Wisconsin was because Jan Van Sina had earlier set up a Department of African History there. And he was the man who Alex Haley, remember Alex Haley?
Yes.
Alex Haley had gone to him for help in understanding where those words were that he had in the family history. And Van Sina had helped him discover, so that was what went into Roots. Yeah. So they created a Department of African Languages and Literature, and it was fantastic. We had people from Senegal, from Cameroon, from Ghana. One of my very close friends was a Ghanaian.
Mali.
All kinds of... Well, I don't think we had anyone from Mali in the beginning. But anyway...
Gambia by chance, because Alex Haley is very popular in the Gambia. I mean, during my time there were many murals dedicated to him, and I think he visited on several occasions as well. So just as how you went to Africa at a time when revolutions were very ripe, and you mentioned the University of Wisconsin, I just wanted to ask a very salient question. How pivotal was the University of Madison-Wisconsin in shaping your overview or outlook of African Indigenous cultures and your eventual ethnographic research, such as documentation of Jamaican oral narratives on African?
Well, it was very important. It was very important because I managed to convince them. I was there to study Kiswahili, and I managed to convince them that they should let me go to Makere, back to Uganda, to study Luganda, the language there. And so I was able to go over. My husband was back in Uganda, and I managed to go over there, and we got married there in 1970, in June of 1970. And so I was studying Luganda there. And I was supposed to return to Madison after 6 months, and it was very beginning of January 72, and it was the night of the coup.
Was it that during Idi Amin's period?
That was the night of the coup when Idi Amin took over from Obote. And we were driving to the airport. I remember I called the U.S. Embassy and I said, is it safe to go out in the middle of this coup? And they said, coup? What coup? And that's when I realized, and they really didn't know what was happening. And so we drove, and it was those days, when you were poor students, you took charter flights.
Yes.
And I had a charter flight. And so I said, I better get there or else I won't be able to leave and I have to continue my studies. And that's another story.
Yes.
But we didn't get to the airport that night. Well, we got to the airport, but left. My husband, of course, said you have to leave. And so 5 days later, when I did leave and got on the first flight to London, there were all those reporters who they wanted news of what had happened with the coup. They were sticking microphones in my face, and all I said was, no comment, because I didn't know if I said the wrong thing, it might hurt somebody back in Uganda. So I got back to Wisconsin. I finished my master's. I did my thesis on East African poetry of assertion, on the poetry of the Ugandan Okelo Ochuli, who wrote Orphan, and also of Okot Pipitek, Song of Lerino. I don't know if you've ever heard of it, but they were two very famous. In fact, Okelo is still a friend. He's in Nigeria, has spent most of his life in Nigeria.
I think there's a book in the library archive. Yes.
Probably, because,
the poem of
Okot
Pipitek. I think it's actually on my desk.
I have to tell you that it was, well, I managed to pass my prelims. Mm-hmm. So I was back in Uganda, and I was going to start my research, and I was on recording with a tape recorder and photographing.
Yes.
And it was to do in Uganda and in Kiswahili over in Kenya. Mm-hmm. And then all of a sudden, of August 1972, Amin suddenly announced the expulsion of all non-citizen Asians, people of Asian, Pakistani, Indian ancestry, they call them Asian. But we thought that didn't affect us because my husband was a Ugandan citizen. Mm-hmm. And there were some vary between 60 to 80,000, and out of a country that at the time had like 25 million people. So we didn't think it was going to be a big thing. But the next thing, 2 Americans were shot dead for taking photographs. One of them was the heir to a beer fortune in Milwaukee, so it made big publicity. And my husband's passport, when he was confiscated, mm-hmm. and a Ugandan friend went and got it back. The head of the department, a Ugandan, said, listen, I advise you really better leave. And a Hungarian who was in the department came to us and he said, look, I saw my family shot in the Hungarian Revolution. You have got to leave. And so just like that, 6 weeks, and I knew I couldn't go around the country with my tape recorder and photo. Yes. So just like that, we had to leave. But when we got back to California, one of the things that I didn't tell you was that when we got married in Kampala in June of 1970, my father invited a Jamaican professor of economics who was at McCarry for that year to come to our wedding reception. That was Professor Dr. Marshall Hall. And I've asked you if you were related to him.
That's a distant relative.
Is he really? Yes. Well, he changed our life because that's where the Jamaican connection comes in. Yes. Marshall wrote to Dear and he said, this is, they have become close friends while they were both at McCarry. They'd even written a paper together, I think on the East African Common Market. So he wrote to Dear and he said, look, come to the University of the West Indies, because after having been in Uganda, Marshall was working in the States, his mind was America, he had come back to Jamaica. And so he wrote and he said, come to Jamaica and maybe we can work on the Common Market, the East African the West Indian Common Market, so the Caribbean Common Market. So my department, under the extraordinary circumstances, was kind enough to say, well, okay, you can do the African heritage and the oral narratives.
But at that time,
Jamaica.
The University of the West Indies did not have an African Studies department.
Absolutely, not at all. Not at all. All they had was uses of English. Uses of English.
Department of English, I think.
Yeah, but it wasn't, they were allowing people, in that uses of English, it was allowing how it could be used in other ways and blah, blah, blah. So when I came here, I had, as I mentioned, M.J. Smith, who was an advisor to Michael Manley, had given me a list of people. Olive Lewin was one of them.
Yes.
And I talked about that. But another one was this man, Adam Cooper. Adam Cooper had been brought in to study unemployed youth as part of Manley's hope to be able to assist people, Mm-hmm. And in fact, his work was later published as Changing Jamaica. And Adam had met with me, and he said, when I got here, he was one of the people I contacted, and he said to me that he had made friends with 3 unemployed youths in Magistrate Pan. Now, you were asking me, in the questions you were going to ask, how Dr. Olive Lewin
Yes.
could be of assistance and what I worked with her and so forth.
Yes.
But I have to tell you, Marsha, I'm sorry, but you maybe, somebody was kind enough to send me the link for that whole inaugural address, which was very well done. I have to congratulate the ACIJ JMB.
Well, actually, Chelsea Stephenson, who was the curator of the exhibition.
Very well
and
done.
O'Neil Passley was the audiovisual technician.
Very well
They're
done,
here
both
today.
of you. Because I got the link, I watched the whole thing, and I saw that my small contribution, my segment, if you go to 1 hour and 50 minutes,
Yes.
and 2 hours and 6 minutes, and if you copy those 16 minutes, that is everything that I could possibly say on the subject, because I went back and looked it up, and I really carefully said. So I'm not going to try and repeat what I already said on that. So after Olive's work, I also, Adam Cooper took me down to Madison. He told me about Madison. I met these 3 young men, and you remember we worked with reel-to-reel tape recorders and cameras. You know, back then videos were rare. This was in '73.
Yes.
We arrived in Jamaica April 11th, 1973. I got to work right away. And a year later, some other scholar came, and I was going to take him down to Augusttown. Remember I told you how Olive had sent me to Augusttown?
Yes.
With Hazel Ramsey McClune. And I cannot speak highly enough about her. She was a research officer. Absolutely a fabulous lady. So when he came with a video, you know what a mobile video back then was in '74? It was the size of a footlocker.
Yes.
And I'm serious. Anyway, I went down to Magistrate Pan, and I remember you said, I think your next question, did I encounter any?
Yes, my next question was how you became associated with the ACIJ JMB.
Well, that I say you have to go back to in your thing, but you also asked me, what challenges did you face?
Yes, okay.
Okay, now I'm going to give you a challenge.
What challenges did you face in the collection of Jamaican folk tales?
Absolutely, and you dropped me into the deep end here because I went down there and I was sitting in this place. It was a little foundry, and I was sitting with this Rastafarian fellow, and he was telling me about Marcus Garvey. Mm-hmm. And I know Rupert Lewis,
yes,
who later became chairman of the ACIJ.
Yes.
I heard later that he had actually referred to some of those, what that man had told me that day about Marcus Garvey. Mm-hmm. So I know it was of use to somebody. But anyway, so we're sitting there, and all of a sudden I heard this chant, police, police, police. And it made me think of a documentary I'd seen about Soweto. And then 2 men in plainclothes burst into this outdoor tent-like place and said, "What's going on here?" And one of them put his gun to my head. The other one I jumped up as the one who knocked the metal chair out from under me, had the gun at my head, and they took the Rastafarian out, and he was on his knees begging for his life. And eventually I discovered they were plainclothes policemen. And then they marched me out into my car, and I thought, of course a big crowd had gathered, I thought that they had finished with me. So when we got to 3 miles, I was starting to drive up, to go back. And they thought they were taking me to Hunts Bay Police Station. And so they forced me off down into a little side street. And I finally got them to allow me to turn on my tape recorder so they could hear what we were doing. Mm-hmm. And that's when I realized one of them was inebriated. And I hoped they wouldn't notice the ashes from the ganja that the guy had been smoking. Yes. And the other man, he finally realized, he understood what I was explaining to him. And I'll never forget, he said to me, "It's only people who go in there are for drugs or subversion." Now this was April '73, so you can see that with the police were worried about subversion, it was a time of
rebellion,
political change in Jamaica.
I think that was Baka Wall during that time.
Baka Wall was Tivoli.
was Timothy.
Yeah,
Okay, yes.
yeah, and I'll get to Brother Martin later. He was from Bacawal, right?
Yes,
right. I hope I'm not taking too long.
No. This
Okay.
is very interesting.
Okay.
Actually, I mean, you're right on the cuffs of all these revolutions. You know, in the street with the people. That's what we really want to hear. So my next question is, in the context of recording or conservation of oral histories with indigenous communities, practitioners of Jamaican folk cultures, how significant is this adage stating the necessity of looking into your own backyard to understand shifting cultural meaning and practices?
Well, there we were just exactly hitting on it.
Mm-hmm.
You know, when Rex Nettleford heard about this incident, he actually gave me a formal letter to explain that I was legitimately doing research. And you know, when I went back to that, again, on another occasion, a police military patrol came in. And you can understand how things were difficult even there if the military were patrolling with police.
Yes.
But I have to say, the soldier read the letter. He could not have been more cordial.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, fine, go ahead. And I have always had the greatest respect for the JDF.
Yes.
For the police, I tell you, I would shake like a leaf. For the year after that,
Traumatic.
I was really, I was very frightened. And sadly enough, you know what that taught me was that of the three young men I met,
Mm-hmm.
one ended up in a barrel in a drug deal gone wrong, it was alleged later. The second one was a really nice fellow. Years later, his daughter's boyfriend shot him dead. And the third one became a close family friend. He was a fisherman, and his whole family, his widow, his daughter now, and grandson are like part of family to me. So, but what it taught me was that if you are a poor black youth in a ghetto garrison community, it is almost impossible to escape.
Yeah.
It is so difficult.
You become a statistic.
It really is so difficult. You know. And anyway, so after that, I traveled initially with someone who knew the area to actually introduce me to people. And once I did that, then people would say, it's okay, you can talk to her, and that is how I was able to learn more about other things. And in fact, remember I mentioned that Olive and Hazel Ramsey introduced me to Adina Henry in Augusttown.
Mm-hmm.
And when I was down there, this Rasta man again, and he was from Bacawal, but when they built Tivoli, they destroyed a lot of Bacawal.
Yeah.
And so he migrated up to Augusttown. So he was living there, and he walked up to me and he said, I'd like to sing a song for Africa. And he was a drummer. And that's how I met Alex Parker, Brother Martin. And he was also a marvelous story. He was wonderful. And again, he and his grandchildren, his granddaughter especially, are like family to me. And so through that way, I would start to meet more people. I took trips in areas like Trelawney, to Westmoreland. I especially love Westmoreland with the cottonwood trees remind me of the baobab trees in East Africa, especially Tanzania. Yes. The baobab trees are beautiful.
Stunning, majestic.
Majestic.
Has a lot. Yes, Gambia and Senegal on the border of Casamas.
So you know what I mean. Yes. And also, Portland and so forth. So those proved very fruitful, but exhausting. It was very tiring. Mm-hmm. And you know, today I don't think that I could travel so safely around the country the way I did then, which is kind of sad. But you asked about how,
the legacy. What do you think is the lasting legacy of Dr. Olive Lewin to Jamaican culture? I mean,
her legacy, as I very much mentioned when I spoke, but her legacy was not only the creation of the Jamaica Memory Bank. She worked very closely with Eddie Seaga. Yes. Mr. Seaga, as Minister of Culture, did a great deal for this country. I mean, he really did. And he was the one who gave Olive the freedom to do these things, like the Jamaica Memory Bank. She set up the Jamaica Folk Singers.
Yes.
Very much, and Hazel again is very involved in that.
Very instrumental.
And Olive went on to become quite an international scholar.
Yes, she was.
I went to Berlin with her when she was presenting a paper about the work at an international conference in Germany. So her impact was very important. I'll get to more of her if you allow me, with another book that she actually helped to influence. So Olive Lewin was very important, and I mentioned it then, but I love the fact that her daughter, Major Joanna Lewin, was the first female helicopter pilot in Jamaica, and she went all over the country with Olive too. I mean, as a child, so she was immersed in this kind of thing, and I always thought it was significant that she went into the JDF because she knew that was also part of what really kept Jamaica basically very safe compared with so many countries in the world.
Yes, I think Chelsea was able to spend a lot of time with her during
great
lecture.
Very, very good. Okay, but you also asked something about how I think you asked about how the input of the university.
Yes.
Well, ask it in your way.
We spoke about the how pivotal the University of Madison-Wisconsin was in shaping your outlook. And you expounded on that in terms of coming to Jamaica not having an African Studies department. I mean, was that for you?
Well, no, because I was still related to their department when I was doing my research. I wasn't looking for the university people to help me.
Right.
I was looking for the people who had this oral treasures. And so, but what did help me was the professors and the fellow graduates at the Department of African Language. We had one professor who was absolutely outstanding, Dr. Harold Shoib. And in 1 year, he was voted the best professor in the whole United States. He had done his work as a graduate student, trekking thousands of miles in South Africa where he studied, and throughout the Transkei, where he studied Xhosa narratives. Now, I can't do the wait. Can you do it?
No.
Anyway,
I wouldn't even dare try.
He could do it, and he was the one who, I think he was very influenced by Levi-Strauss and structuralism. And so he had this structural approach to analyzing folklore and understanding the use of repetition to preserve and build narrative. So that you would reveal the important cultural concepts within a community, which were essential to that community. And it helped to demonstrate that children's stories, they were far more powerful, and they deserved far more respect than they were usually perceived to be. And that's where, in the same way that Louise Bennett was able to demonstrate that Creole, what we call patois, was a much more important language than people were giving it credit for. Dr. Shoib's work in oral narrative helped people to examine folklore so that they could approach it in a way that was more respectful. And so my use of his approach is why, and forgive me, I'm a writer, not a speaker. I had to make these notes, but thanks for your questions. Yes. But that's why, and this is where, again, why this book, my dissertation, was actually published as Jamaican Folktales and Oral Histories. It was the #1 Jamaica 21st Anniversary Anthology Series. This has Adina Henry on the cover, and it was why people like Rex Nettleford, Professor Fred Cassidy, Mervyn Morris, Professor Edward Kamal Brathwaite, and Olive Lewin,
all great stalwarts,
all were able to recommend the book. It's because of this structural approach. I did 41 years of writing for the Gleaner, where I would try to highlight a lot of these things so that it would bring to the attention of the general public what was really happening at places like the ACIJ, JMP. But I'm now a veteran of, I'm one of the 3 trustees of the Press Association of Jamaica. And I was invited to the Veterans Luncheon, which was, obviously I could not miss that. It was the same time as your Anansi thing, and that's why I had to miss it. I was so sorry.
And so
but Amina Blackwood, she has done so much to carry on this tradition.
Yes, she has.
She is just
continues.
absolutely terrific. Right, absolutely.
I'm so glad you mentioned Frederick Cassidy, because this interview would not be complete without speaking about your professional association with the late Jamaican linguist Frederick Cassidy, founder of the Dictionary of American Regional English, DARE. To what extent did he influence your groundbreaking research and publication on Jamaican folk tales and oral histories?
His Dictionary of Jamaican English was essential to my having to scramble to try and learn and work with Creole, with Patois.
Yes.
And as it happened, I don't know if you're aware, but Frederick Cassidy, and that's it's spelled with a C at the end because he has French ancestry. He was at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, and he was one of the 3 people on my doctoral committee. And so his appreciation of the material that I collected in Jamaica was profound. I think that he understood its importance. And so he was able to explain to some of the other members of my committee who were used to dealing with African material that this was really, a positive contribution. And in fact, Frederick Cassidy came to Jamaica on a visit once. He stayed with us here. And I actually took him down to Augustown to meet Brother Martin. And this...
It's funny, I just Googled Frederick Cassidy and that's the picture that came up.
Oh my gosh! Oh, that's wonderful. And it's so much better because it clarifies Brother Martin's face better.
That's literally the picture that came up on Google.
And it was 1999. And you know why it's come up is because when he... I took him not only to Augustown, I took him walking around the reservoir, and he would point out all the different plants and their Patois names and this and that, or Latin names. But when he died, when he passed away, one of the women who worked with him on the Dictionary of American Regional English, she said that photograph was on his bedside when he died.
Wow.
I was so touched.
So
I was really, really touched.
So Dr. Tanna, cultures always seem to be in transition. Is this applicable to Jamaica's oral history?
Of course. One of the other questions you asked was, I think you might still ask, is there some way that it can be used for
the
economic
situation? Yes.
And I would like
the cultural economy.
Right. And I would suspect that one of the reasons that the oral narratives are not more widely appreciated by visitors and tourists and so on is because of the language barrier. They can't understand Creole. Now, I should have brought down, and I didn't. I made from this the Creative Production and Training Center. We did I was on the board of CPTC, and we did a television program, which was shown and broadcast. And then I was able to do it get the rights to put it onto a video and subsequently DVD. And now I understand that's going the way and everything you have to go on to YouTube, whatever. But I also did CDs of some of the main narratives from here. But I think that is why music, Jamaican music, can be appreciated by anybody, and sports. And I think those people have realized how they can make economic benefit out of it, but not as much out of the literature. And I think it is something that definitely needs to be worked on.
So the country is yet to capitalize on its cultural economy
for the oral narratives and the writing,
yes,
as much as they could. you know, they have some, but Marlon James, I mean, he's fantastic.
Yes.
Look at how he's breaking into the barriers of novels and stuff. But you know who else? Let me not.
There's
And
also-
his other, sorry, Marlon James, his other book, Make Jane Black, Bring Jane Black. It's about to come out. It's a HBO miniseries,
Yes.
and it's about to be released. And they filmed it in Jamaica.
Yeah,
They actually filmed some of it downtown.
Yes.
That's right. And Justin Hansel,
And there's
you know,
Pie
Harry
Miller
Hansel.
also. Yes.
the film.
Calabash.
There is so much more that is being
A
done.
lot more.
But it could be. But you know, I couldn't not mention Olive
Yes.
Senior. Now, Olive Senior, she's had 20 books published. She's a poet, short story,
Yeah.
novelist. She has and
Bravo, historian.
children's, and her encyclopedia of Jamaican heritage is very important.
Yeah, we do have that.
She
at
was
ACIJ.
wanting to get it onto, you know, so that you could access it online.
Yeah.
But she hadn't been able to find the funding to do that yet. Now, that's something that could be very important for someone
Very
to please
much so.
subsidize.
Yes.
But let me not forget this. I want to bring this to attention. You asked about Olive.
This our Bible.
This one, this came about as a result of initially these two, Marcus Koster and Wolfgang Bender. They were two German scholars who came
Yes.
to put, when John, you know, Olive had been at the School of Music, and a lot of her musical stuff, they were accessioning, taking it over and putting it onto CDs and digitalizing
Yes,
it,
yeah,
so it would not be
digitization.
list. That's what I'm trying to look at. And when they were here, they realized that there had been material written on the oral heritage, not just music. And so they contacted. Would you allow me to read a little something that this was? I wrote an article.
Yes, your
When
article
this
is there on
No, I have 5 articles in here, but can I give you a little bit of the history of
We
this?
have that book. That book is used widely by all the researchers.
But the story of how the book came about is fascinating. Do you mind?
yeah, go ahead.
Okay. When German scholar Marcus Koster was in Jamaica digitalizing the collection of African Jamaican music at the Edna Manley School for the Visual and Performing Arts, preserving this material before the tape recordings disintegrated. And another German scholar, Wolfgang Bender, had already edited the book Rastafarian Art, which was published in English in 2005. And I have to tell you, he has some wonderful things there was Down by 3 Miles.
Yes.
There was an artist who took his own money, you know, and he would paint his zinc walls, murals, and that's in that book. Anyway, he realized that in addition to music, art, and religion, which there were numerous articles on other aspects of African Jamaican music, dance, and religion, which had never been put into an anthology. So they suggested some articles for a book, which they proposed to Ian Randall, publishers.
Yes.
And the idea was spawned. They left for Africa and Europe, and they kept in touch. Christine Randall, you know, Ian's daughter, she was, and they started contacting writers to obtain permission to include their articles. Well, I was one of those authors, and I have 5
interesting
I
writing
have
articles here.
I have Tambu and Trelawney,
Yes.
Dinky Minnie, and in fact, this photograph is of Dinky Minnie.
Yes.
In
was it
with
Westmoreland?
it was with Hazel Ramsey. We went in St. Mary's.
St.
We were
Mary's.
there. There was Kumina.
St. Thomas.
There was Yoruba. Actually, the Kumina also was because one of the Kumina masters was down in Tivoli.
Really, yes.
And so I got to interview him down in Tivoli. And African Yoruba and Kikongo songs and so on. And so when they contacted me, they had just a few, I think 10 articles. And I said, but there's so much more than that. Ken Bilby, who...
Kenneth Bilby.
Yes, Kenneth Bilby, his work. And the Hazel Carter, the language, she married Fred Cassidy.
Oh.
We brought her here. We brought her here from the School of Oriental and African Studies to analyze the Kumina words. I mean, the Kumina.
Kikongo.
Yeah, because that's Kikongo.
Oh, yes.
And she has her article here, Kikongo, Kumina, a Kikongo-based tradition in the New World. That was Bilby. And then she also helped. and we had Marie Morton Lewis.
Yes.
And so
I
actually, they hired me, and I worked with them. And then we got Mr. Seaga's revival into this. And he agreed to do this because he was one of the founders of the Jamaica Journal.
Yeah.
And you'll find a lot of material about
Revival.
the African traditions in Jamaica in the Jamaica Journal, which Olive Sr. was
Yes.
editor. And Seaga said, well, okay, he would allow his revival material to be included in this if somebody would write about the importance of the Institute of Jamaica. And so I was asked to write the foreword to this. And so I went through, this book is a whole century of everything from newspaper articles, magazine articles, books, journals, all kinds of stuff. And so this book is very important.
Very important.
And I wanted to also mention that, I went on to do this thing on Ba, Jamaica's master potter, and he was just born up in Portland.
In Portland, we're so fortunate to have this.
And he was influenced by the African tradition, and so I was able to. He took me to Malu, and so I took the photographs of the African tradition of pottery that existed with Malu, and those photographs are in this book about his life. But
I think I was perusing Amazon yesterday.
oh yeah,
Looking at
oh
this,
good. Yeah,
yes.
well, we try to make it accessible. It's been a labor of love to keep this and the Ba book accessible to people. But what I wanted to tell you, I just 2 years ago, I finished 41 years of writing for the Gleaner. And I have all of the material was put together into this one volume. And this includes all of the different articles about everything from Edna Manley's Ghetto Mother to, it wasn't just
Rise and Fall of Democracy.
yeah, it was also, I also did a lot of travel articles.
There's
which-
one. There's one for Olive Luna as well, you know.
Of course.
Joanna has it.
Yeah, man. There's a lot about here that I molded excellence. I did a lot on Cecil, but there's much about here about they let me write about everything.
Yeah.
And so it was everything from, my first weekend in Sicily to,
This is a global book.
it's a global book, but it really started, the people's sociologists. It's all kinds of things, but what I really, Capo tells what motivates him.
Capo Reynolds, yes.
And Capo's collection in the National Gallery was very important.
Very important.
Here's the one. Here's the article I did on Malu. That was Malu. Yeah. So you ask about Olive. Olive was very instrumental. But then I went on to work with so many other people. And so many other people have done an enormous amount to preserve the traditions of, but not only African. Jackie Ranston. She's a fabulous writer. She researches. She goes into the archives. She does fantastic work. She did the whole thing of the history of King's House, every Governor General, everything, and she found out a lot about Jamaican history back from those days. And actually, it was, somebody who's very important in helping to preserve things. It's Earl Jarrett at Jamaica National, and I believe they subsidized the printing of this book. So I have to tell you, the magazine now. Well, go on, ask me what else you wanted
Yes,
to
I
ask.
wanted to ask you. You mentioned the Kikongo language. So recent conversations with members of the Kumina and Maroon communities revealed there's an urgent need for the revitalization of Chromanti, spoken by the Maroons, and Kikongo, spoken by Kumina practitioners. And these languages once formed insights into the socio-cultural and spiritual fabric of these peoples. But would you say these languages are, or once were, the cornerstone to celebrating Maroon and Kumina cultural identity?
Well, I think the preservation of the few words of the language. I don't think anybody spoke the whole language anymore at the period in the 70s and 80s when people were finally researching. But for instance, the article that Hazel Carter did,
yes,
if they're not aware of it,
there's a whole lexicon there.
Yes. And so, of course, it's like with Alex Haley, preserving those few words. It was, oh my gosh, I didn't even mention that when I did get to Wisconsin, I think one of the reasons they got me there was because they wanted to start a journal, and they called it Bashiru, which is Hausa, no silence. And that was, again, another. So I think even the preservation of a small amount of language is very essential to, yes, I think. But I would hope that people wouldn't kind of rewrite history and say that these things were really vibrant. The traditions were vibrant, but the language, it was difficult to preserve.
Yes, very difficult.
But that's why, with the African Caribbean Institute of Jamaica, Jamaica Memory Bank, what you have is essential to preserving and sharing. And remember what I said about a bank?
Yes.
That's why
A
the importance of
repository.
your work with the audio-visual and also the digitalization.
Yes, Mr. Passley has been doing the digitization.
It's so important to make that accessible. So I think that it's your place that will help the Maroons and the people to really, re-educate or make people aware of their heritage. And I think it's wonderful. I mean, when I was going out to Accompong to record, and Adina Henry, she said to me, "I've heard about the Maroons all my life. I'd love to go." I said, "Well, please, I would love for you to come." And so we went together,
Right.
and Thomas Rowe was the Maroon storyteller, and the colonel, we spent the night in the colonel's house, but he brought him up, and he started telling narratives, Maroon narratives. And then Adina Henry would spark something, and a couple of them, she knew, even though she was actually had blue eyes, and Teresa, her name was Teresa actually, she was born in Above Rocks. And as thanks to Olive Senior's book, I discovered that some of the people had come when the Haitian Revolution was on. Some of the Haitians came here, or the French came here,
Yes.
with their Haitian servants and slaves. And I believe she must have been born up there with some French ancestry, because she has these wonderful blue eyes. But at the time, the Jamaican English authorities were very worried about the revolution spreading.
Yes.
And so they offered free passage to New Orleans for a lot of people. And that's how New Orleans got some of the people up there.
Creole, yes,
Yeah,
the Haitian Creole.
and that's right. But you go on now.
Yeah. So I'm happy you have this book here with the photograph, because I have a very
Well, what I really want to do is divide this up into talks with Tanna, all the different interviews, and travels, because the travel articles are quite different from the interviews, so it really needs to be published or put on the internet in a way that people can absorb what they want, which are quite different. But it does need to be shared, because one article here and one article there, and you can't find everything over 41 years.
So the historical and cultural aspect of your work has not gone unnoticed. And in 2014, you were conferred a National Honor Award, Order of Distinction, Officer Class by the government of Jamaica. Was this a moment of huge surprise for you?
Well, I was surprised, and I was very honored. I was very grateful. And I have to tell you that I have the highest regard for our Governor General. Sir Patrick is a marvelous person, just as an individual.
Right.
But I had served on the King's House Foundation. I had served with previous Governor Generals on the King's House Foundation. I was on the board of the Creative Production and Training Center. I've been on the board of the Jamaica National Museum. I was on the board of, well, the Central Bank of the Memory Bank and then the ACIJ. And so, I've been really involved in a lot of cultural work with Jamaica.
Very much so.
But I was very honored. Yeah.
I would imagine.
Yeah.
So Jamaica has a creditable cultural heritage. Is there a need to develop more sustainable and tangible relationships with members of the African diaspora as this relates to the preservation of African cultural retention?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, there is so much much more communication with Africa needs to be done. I remember when Colonel Charles, when he was made an honorary chief in Africa, we at the ACIJ, we invited him to come and give a lecture at the Institute of Jamaica to explain to us all of what was involved and so forth. So we tried very hard to capitalize on things like that. But we need to have a lot more interaction between Africa and Jamaica, and hopefully, with air travel becoming more accessible, it will be more, easier to get done. I mean, Olive did, she brought over Aditupa, she brought over African scholars, she took them to Abeokuta.
Yes, and Mr. Siaga brought over a few to assist with the Kikongo languages, I think.
Well, that was his. Yeah, we did a lot of that stuff. But and also not only with African diasporas, but with the African Jamaican diaspora in the States, because I think they would have memories from their parents or grandparents, and they would be interested to know. Oh wow! I didn't know we had Tamu and Trelawny. I didn't know we had Dinky Many. I didn't know we had Etu, and these are things that should be shared with their children in America or in the UK. And, we have like Rita Marley is so much in Ghana. Yeah. We need so much more. I love Ghanaian. Lovely. I mean, there's so much more that can be done.
So vibrant.
So vibrant. I remember now what I was trying to remember also. When I went we started this I wish I had a copy to show you of Bashiru, but I couldn't find it. It's hidden away somewhere else. But I mean, yeah, you're absolutely right. And this is why the work that all of you are doing is just really important.
So how can historians, ethnographic researchers, linguists, anthropologists, archaeologists develop their research skills to capture the dynamic aspects of field work? For example, my background is in history, Chelsea's anthropology, archaeology.
Oh, wow.
Mr. Passley, business.
Technology, that's so important for the preservation. Yeah, man. I mean, I really need to get these stories that I did 2 CDs, Maroon Storyteller.
Yes.
Oh, I'm starting, between this competition, between Thomas Rowe and Adina Henry. That's on one CD, and then the other is a list of other people. But your technology is very important. I would love to know more later. I'm going to ask you about archaeology in Jamaica. I did mention at the Olive Women thing that we did train each field officer in each of the parishes, how to go. You have to go out and present yourself in a way that is not, I know everything. Yes. You go out and you're interested in the people and the individuals, and then gradually things will emerge, and it might not always be what you expect.
Yes.
So you have to have an open mind.
We do try at the ACIJ, that's of course funding. So intangible cultural heritage practitioners and their communities in Jamaica are at risk in the safeguarding of lived experiences. Any suggestion as to how this could be minimized?
Well, I think one of the great ways in which you can do is to have I don't know what the word is they use now, but correspondence alliances with foreign universities, so that you can have an exchange of technicians, an exchange of scholars, and you can also apply for international funding for grants because you're sharing. But it's very important. You need to have somebody here go to a conference on African literature in the States or in one of the other countries and explain what the work is.
Yeah.
You need to probably more like go on TikTok or whatever and do a summary, an introduction of what your place is. And
we are very
the
active
States.
on social media. For example, Chelsea's, I mean, as a young Gen Z, are you Chelsea or
don't
somewhere
know.
in between? But she's very active in promoting our social media. I mean, last week we were at the funeral service, unfortunately, for
I know.
Colonel
Yeah.
Marcia Douglas.
Right.
So we do put ourselves out there. We continue to evolve.
It's with the contacts. And then people go out and they do go back and they raise awareness and also grant. You know, I was on the board of the American Friends of Jamaica for 17 years, and writing grants is so important to try and get some
Very
funding.
critical.
And you have to learn how to phrase things that will appeal to the people giving the
Yeah.
money. You also, I know Olive Lewin was very instrumental in getting money from Grace
Very
Kennedy.
much so.
And that was very helpful.
Oh, yes, we
And that's so important. And you are the younger generation who know how to use social media for that effect. Something I don't. And so I did my work, and you can see it's all written down. I'm not a speaker, but thank you so much.
We have the final question, because this has been so interesting, very insightful. I mean, we could spend the entire day with you. I mean, notwithstanding the chocolate cake we're going to have. You are known in various circles as an adept storyteller. What do you envision for the future of oral traditions in Jamaica?
Well, I'm not an adept storyteller. I don't think at
you
all.
tell through your writing.
Through my writing. Okay,
Yes.
maybe. But I think that the future lies. Well, you would better pose that question to Amina Blackwood, because she is the one who has carried on this tradition in a way. She is more knowledgeable about what is happening now.
Yes.
To be honest, I want to show you a couple of magazines too. When I left the Gleaner, I've been writing for another magazine, and I don't know, when you're over you can stop it and I can show you, but I've moved on to other things. Like this was my last book. This was The Lady of Silk and Steel, from Everest to Embassy. Sue Cobb was the
former
American ambassador here from 2001 to 2005. She was very instrumental in working with Peter Phillips when he was the Minister of National Security. But her life, I mean, the segment on Jamaica is like a third of the book. And she did a lot for women's groups and various things in here. But I'm not as deeply involved with the storytelling aspect as I was 51 years ago. The founder of this is a graduate of the Edna School of Art.
Oh, wow.
And he's a Jamaican who lives in the States now. And he started, but the editor is a Jamaican here, Peter Williams. He started out with a magazine called Jamaica because it was focused primarily on Jamaica. And like here, I was able to write an article
The King's House.
to publicize the King's House book, so that people, and to bring up the history of Jamaica in some ways. In this one, and then he started going from Jamaica, Caribbean-wide. And this is how, the same way ACIJ JMB comes from Jamaica, can go international.
Yes.
And remember, you might not remember, in 2009, you know, the museum put on a display of
uprising.
the Spanish influence
Yes.
in Jamaica. And you as an archaeologist, all this archaeology, the artifacts that they have from Seville and so on. And the King and Queen of Spain came to Jamaica. And before going to the Parliament, they stopped at the museum and they went and opened this exhibition. I think that's fantastic. I mean, the Institute of
Jamaica protocol.
the Institute of Jamaica, and which ACIJ JMB is a division of the Institute of Jamaica. The Institute of Jamaica is the oldest center of learning in the Caribbean, far earlier than the university, like 80 years before the university. And so that I was very proud of the fact that they did that. Oh shoot, I've got the wrong one. I wanted to show you. I did an article on the National Gallery, which I want to show you.
Some photos
Yeah,
afterwards, if
the
you don't
National
mind.
Gallery is fantastic. I mean, we
Another
really
premier
have-
Caribbean institute.
Absolutely.
And it was the first gallery in the English-speaking Caribbean.
Precisely, that's exactly how I start my article. So that is how, and that this man now has taken it, and this year he's getting a television platform. So he'll be able, and some of the, Paul Williams is somebody. Do you ever read Paul Williams?
Yes.
I love his
He's a
articles.
good supporter of the African Caribbean Institute.
I love his articles. He writes brilliant.
Yes.
So some of this eventually, Derwent Donaldson wants to do documentaries about, the heritage of different Caribbean countries, especially, of course, Jamaica. So I think that people like that will come and use some of your resources too when they are themselves able to provide more. So we're moving from one stage of life to another, and it's all joining together to promote Jamaica's oral heritage and Jamaica culture.
It weaves a beautiful tapestry of socio-historical culture
It really
and
does.
people, of course.
Yeah.
So, Dr. Tanna, on behalf of the African Caribbean Institute of Jamaica Memory Bank, we want to thank you so much for this interview. It was really eye-opening. It was riveting. I mean, our viewers, I'm sure, will be calling in, requesting more. And so,
Well, thank you so much. I
We
really
appreciate
appreciate
you
your being
as well.
here. I afterwards I can show you some of my collection of African
Sure.
art. But thank you all, and you are the future.
thank you so much.